Hello and welcome. It is a blistery Tuesday afternoon at 4:30. It is the 21st day of September in the year 2021, and I am your totally awesome guide to all tabletop role-playing game news, weather, and sports, the love train that is known as the OGGM. And we have two bits and pieces of news. We have first our first look at the Dragon book that is coming out. Supposedly our final book of the production year from Wizards of the Coast. Of course, we cannot say with 100% factuality that this is the final book before the year ends, because Wizards of the Coast has lied before. But we have our first peek at Fizban's treasury of dragons, and all we know about it so far is that the dragons are going to be ranked by challenge rating. I don't know if that also means they're going to be alphabetical by challenge rating, or just instead of alphabetical, challenge rating. So I'm looking here. And I can't tell if it's going to be challenge rating alphabetical or challenge rating straight. The article doesn't say. It does say that the worm category, when you get to the end, is separated into 3: gem, chromatic, metallic, rather than by each dragon type. But that's only the great worms. Once you get the ones below the great worms are going to be under the... So it's going to be challenge rating till you get to great worm, which I think is challenge rating 26 or challenge rating 24. And then that's when they split. So before that, they're not split into the gem, chromatic, metallic until great worm. So an ancient crystal dragon isn't a gem dragon until it becomes a challenge rating 25. It becomes a great ancient crystal dragon. This I don't understand. It should either be alphabetical or by challenge rating. Challenge rating 1, challenge rating 2, challenge rating 3, challenge rating 4. But then should it be alphabetical per challenge rating? Like challenge rating 1, abyssal, and challenge rating 35. It hurts my brain. And speaking of hurting my brain, Wizards of the Coast is the gift that keeps on giving. We have from Polygon a deeper review of the Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Now, we have to take anything this review says with a grain of salt, because Polygon has been in the back pocket of Wizards of the Coast / Dungeons and Dragons since it was first released. It has always been the sister publication to Dragon Magazine. It has had a long-standing relationship with Wizards and TSR. So, yeah. So, this article is called "The Wild Beyond the Witchlight Campaign is Dungeons and Dragons for Theater Kids. Wizards of the Coast is playing to its new base" by Charlie Hall. And it was printed September 20th, 2021 at 3 o'clock. So yesterday. Because, let's just write it this way. Wild Beyond the Witchlight Campaign is a Dungeons & Dragons for theater kids. Because up to now, Dungeons & Dragons hasn't been for theater kids. Hasn't we always been sort of part of the theater of the mind? Already, Charlie, you're like, So there's a couple things in this article just from the first read that are very interesting. And in the very first paragraph, Charlie talks, Mr. Hall, Mrs. Hall, I don't know. Charlie talks about how the ambassadors for the hobby are a new breed of professional entertainers, acting troupes like Critical Role, The Adventure Zone, and Dimension 20. and others have breathed a new life into the franchise by modeling a different, more character-driven way of play. He out and out says what I have hinted at and assumed and gotten shit on about Critical Role since day one. This guy pretty much openly admits the same thing that I've said, that these are professional entertainers and acting troops. And what you see on Critical Role and all the shows that try and follow the Critical Role format are acting troops putting on a professional entertainment project. Of course, his second aspect of this paragraph is that a different, more character-driven way to play. Because up to then, none of us have ever done character-driven role-playing until Critical Role. Nobody in the 45 some odd years of D&D before Critical Role showed up did character-driven role-playing. That whole World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade, character-driven role-playing upswing that we saw in the 80s, that never happened because we didn't do character-driven role-playing until Critical Role. Open the door. See, he goes on talking about how the Wild of the Witchlight is an adventure made for theater kids and is designed to create a campaign that doesn't require combat. It demands careful and consistent collaboration with the players and the GM to complete the adventure, and there are ways to complete the adventure without combat. If there is no combat, then why do the monsters have stat blocks, and why is Warduke literally listed as his favorite combat technique, hitting things with swords? This is a module just like any other module, and it's going to be resolved just like every other module. To insinuate that players are now trying to resolve D&D without combat means you haven't sat at a D&D table, because every D&D table I've sat at over the last 5 years is pretty much just 20% murder hobos, and the rest are like whining and crying because the game isn't like what they saw in Critical Role. Also, you're insinuating that up to now we've never had scenarios where we could resolve without combat. And literally almost every year there has been some product for D&D or other hobbies, other products like D&D that have presented scenarios that could be resolved without combat. Chateau de Amberville and Child's Play are two modules that immediately come to mind that can be resolved without combat. So, and then there was another one in here. And this is the third thing. Even new players are showing up expecting to experience a moving character arc, and doing the work up front helps to that aspect to pay off in the long run. Even new players are showing up expecting a experience. This is, of course, the number one issue that we have had since Critical Role. And here is again, Charlie Hall is just reaffirming this issue. The Mercer effect, the number one problem that is from with the whole toxic makes bag that has been plaguing our hobby, is right there. Players are coming to the table with an expectation that the game is going to play out in a certain way. And if it does not play out in that way, they become volatile and toxic. If I don't run a game exactly the way this guy expects me to run the game, I'm playing D&D wrong. This whole thought pattern enters that idea that you can be running D&D wrong if you're not meeting the expectations. The only expectation you should have when you sit down to play any role-playing game is you're sitting down to play a role-playing game, and you're sitting down to play a world that is consistent with the agreed-upon physics of the world. The only expectation I have when I'm sitting down to play Star Wars is Star Wars shit's gonna happen. The only expectation I have when I sit down to play superheroes is I'm gonna be doing some superhero stuff. And the only expectation I have when I'm playing Dungeons & Dragons is I'm going to be rolling some d20s, I'm going to be rolling some d8s, I'm going to have to deal with the weird, clunky D&D combat, and I'm going to be doing some D&D stuff. I'm going to be talking to NPCs, I'm going to be disarming traps, I'm going to be solving puzzles, I'm going to be killing monsters, I'm going to be figuring out mysteries, and then I'm going to go home. That's the only expectation you should have, is when you sit down and play Game X, you're expecting Game X to be Game X. That's it. You shouldn't have to compete with Matt Murder. Matthew Mercer. Wow, my Freudian slip. So he goes on to talk about this. Of course, he tends to really glaze over some of the things that we have pointed out. Some of the huge changes that this game, Witchlight, is bringing to the Dungeons and Dragons landscape. Nowhere in here is the mention of the fact that the aforementioned alignment has returned. Instead, he talks about how you can fly through a rain cloud and make friends with a sentient oil can, how Oz-like, and have your dreams trapped in a crystal cavern. That sounds all very pixie-ish and very midnight, Fae court, all the kind of things I would expect in a very whimsical setting that Witchlight should present. But nowhere does Charlie mention the fact, hey, guess what? Alignment's back. Nowhere in this does he mention Warduke or Riglin or the classic action figure 80 characters and how they are now suddenly appearing in a Dungeons and Dragons environment. Nowhere does he mention the sassy dickhead rabbit folk or the chonky fairies, the fact that these pixies are now human-sized. And nowhere does he mention Tasha and the revelation of who Tasha really is. That, our poster girl for diversity, Tasha, is actually the evil witch and mother of Ooze and occasional partner to Vecna that is Ilgwyn, and that everything Tasha said in Tasha's Guide to Whatever was an actual lie. So, yes, he does, talk about all the colorfulness and the whimsicalness and all the pixie-ishness, but nowhere does he mention the fact that, hey, your player character pixies are not going to be pixies. They're going to be gnomes with wings. And alignment's back. So all that whining and crying about, oh, you can't say I'm evil, and then, Wizards of the Coast saying, okay, fine, evil's gone, good's gone, you just do whatever you want, and there's no ramifications, there's no consequences. If you kill the village in the name of it's what my character would do, well, it's not an evil act anymore, it's just what your character would do, so yeah, there's no consequences because nobody's evil. Well, evil's back and good is back, and it specifically says Warduke and his companions are evil, chaotic evil. Stat blocks are back. It has stat blocks for all the monsters. But Charlie sort of glazes over that to focus on the things that are not a selling point. First, these assumptions that this idea didn't exist until Critical Role. Until Critical Role, there was no character-driven role-playing. That's very Genie D of you, Hale, or Hall, or whatever the fuck your name is. Because, yes, role-playing. In fact, I would say we role-played more than people role-play now. You have to fucking role-play when you're playing a character where you had to roll 3d6 for each stat, and you had to stick with what you got. And if your character had a 6 dex, that requires a lot more thinking. That requires a lot more investment. That requires you to be a lot cleverer and role play more and work within the world to keep that character with a 6 dex and 1 hit point alive than it does today, where everybody's got 15 through 18 in every stat. You start with like 20 hit points and you've got superpowers. Yeah, character-driven role play has existed since day one. Resolving problems without combat has existed in the hobby since day one. consistent collaboration between player and DM, that's nothing new. That's existed since day one. And you focus on the two major sins that have ruined the hobby, and you make them sound like they're good thing. You openly admit, Charlie, that Critical Role, the Adventure Zone, Mention 20, and all these other are acting troupes populated by professional entertainers who are creating a polished production of what the hobby could be under the bright lights of Tinseltown, the Hollywood D&D, the special effects, edited, crafted, created acting troupes who are presenting you a professional entertainment product that is the D&D that we see on Critical Role. But that's not real D&D. It's set, and you point out the expectations that because of this fallacy, players are going to come to the table with expectations of how the game should be played. And when those expectations are not met, Mr. and Mrs. Hall, Charlie, that's where this continued level of toxicity that has existed since Critical Role reared its ugly head and Jeannie D first opened her mouth, that continues to this day, because people are coming to the gaming table expecting the game to be a specific way, and if it's not that specific way, they play the Matt Mercer card, they play their X card, they badmouth you, they get on Twitter and call you racist, sexist, homophobic, a bully, you get physically and verbally assaulted, you get doxxed on Twitter, people call you out because you're not Matt Mercer. Well, guess what, Charlie? Only Matt Mercer can be Matt Mercer, and he's a professional entertainer. You say so yourself. Now, I have no problems with Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I'm actually very excited about Wild Beyond the Witchlight. It sounds like something completely different than what we're used to from D&D. It's very whimsical. It's very silly. It's very Midnight Summer's Dream. It's, dealing with the world of fairy, dealing with another demi-plane, continuing that, hey, we're seeing a lot of demi-planes thought pattern that we're seeing in D&D, and where is that revelation leading us to? Why are we seeing so many demi-planes? Why are we seeing so much planar stuff? Is this leading us to the long-awaited return of plane travel, plane walking, planescape? Spelljammer. I'm very excited that Alignment's back. I'm very excited to see these classic characters statted out and explained. And I'm very excited to see the repercussions of the revelation of who Tasha really was and how everything that Tasha talked about and everything that we, Tasha's book set in stone turns out to be a lie. And I'm very excited to see how the crying crowds are going to react when they see, oh, now Alignment's back, at least temporarily. Yes, those actions were evil. Yes, those actions were good. And there is consequences and rewards for being good or evil. And the world of Witchlight doesn't obey the normal world rules of D&D universe. It's a wibbly-wobbly, goofy-woofy fairy world. But it's not the fairy world you expect, because these fairies are the size of gnomes and the rabbit folk are supposedly dicks. So I have no problem with this product. I'm very excited about this product. This could be my second favorite 5th edition product. Tomb of Annihilation, of course, being my first favorite 5th edition product, and Storm King's Thunder being my third. But you, in your review here, you sort of focus on all the things Wizards of the Coast wants you to focus, but that's expected because it's a paid reviewed. Polygon has been in Wizards of the Coast / Dungeons & Dragons pocket for as long as it's existed, and you sort of just glaze over or not even mention the other more important things, the rule changes, the new races, the new classes, the new stuff, the old stuff, the introduction of characters who have long been sort of out there, like Warduke, but never official, and now they're official. But instead, you talk about a swashbuckling dandelion. So the Wild Beyond the Witchlight campaign is Dungeons and Dragons for theater kids, only in the same way that all of Dungeons and Dragons is Dungeons and Dragons for theater kids. Is Wizards of the Coast playing to its new pace? Of course it is. Of course it is. That is 100% true. As long as Wizards of the Coast believes that these individuals out there are the ones who are spending money on their product, this is the kind of product we're going to get. The only way to change that is to vote with our wallet. So that much is true. Other than that, Charlie, I mean, you pointed out some stuff, but you kind of ignored other things. And again, you know, this thing about the new breed of professional entertainment troops, that's you're shining a spotlight on the hidden secret of Critical Role, something that hundreds of individuals have said is not true. It's not a bunch of professional entertainers. It's just some guys playing D&D, and that's the way D&D just needs to be played. If you don't play like Mercer, you're not playing it right. Well, guess what? It's a acting troupe. It's a professional entertainment production, and Charlie's calling it out. Charlie's also calling out the expectations. The expectation is the problem. There should not be any expectation other than if I show up to play Dungeons & Dragons, my only expectation is I'm showing up to play Dungeons & Dragons. So I was asked by somebody on Discord to take a look at this article and comment on it. And at first I was like, well, what am I going to say that I haven't already said before? But now that I've read it, I'm like, yeah, I've got to. I'm probably going to get in trouble for it. But really, come on. There's so many things about Witchlight you could talk about, but instead you focus on the elevator pitch and the things that Wizards of the Coast wants you to say instead of the things we need to talk about and the things that it hints at and the doors that it possibly opens. There's so much going on in Witchlight that could possibly mean something or absolutely nothing, because it is Wizards of the Coast we're talking about. But you don't talk about that. Instead, you talk about swashbuckling dandelions. So anyways, there you go. Somebody asked me to do it, so I did it. If you agree with me, let me know. If you don't agree with me, let me know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 1,000 subs. If you're going to unsubscribe, let me know why, because I can't fix it if you don't tell me what's broken. Till next time, I am the tabletop role-playing game love train that's known as the OGGM. I don't know how or why I have that nickname now, but apparently that's a thing. Stay warm, stay dry, stay healthy, stay happy, stay classy, stay off my land. And remember, it's just a fucking game.